whether it is the Kwela rhythm found in the tune Meadowlands by David Vilakazi. Meadowlands, 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 itando sam. Meadowlands, 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 itando sam. Or whether it is the Goma rhythm found in Boaka by Makoy Mkhobata. Or whether it is a more modern South African jazz sound found in the song Monwabisi by Bheki Mseleko. There's no talking about South African music without mentioning the 1-4-5 progression or the 1-4-1-5 progression. All the songs that I've mentioned have different South African styles, but they all pretty much use the 1-4-1-5 progression. You can almost think of it as like the African American blues. Think about how many melodies that have been written over the blues. Sunny Moon for Two, Straight No Chaser, Blues for Gwen, Now's the Time. Well, for us, it's pretty much the same thing, except we use the 1-4-5 progression. South African music has a rather large history, and this comes through in the music. But in my very youthful music career, what I have found that has really stood out for me is how South African musicians have always been enthusiastic about African American jazz. And I have my own theories about it, and I can back them up. We've had much criticism about being obsessed with bebop and just the American culture in general. I mean, how could you not? It's always in our faces. But I think it's more than that. This sort of imitation and interest in African American style can be looked at from as early as the Manhattan Brothers in the 1950s. The Manhattan Brothers were a group of 4 male singers, sort of like singers in closed harmony style.
Yemi uJake Ntuli neManhattan Brothers siyanibulisa nonke nina abantu belizwe lase-Afrika.
And they were said to be really interested in American vocal groups like the Ink Spots, the Mills Brothers. They particularly loved the Mills Brothers. In fact, their goal was to imitate them exactly. Louis Radebe Peterson, their first professional accompanist, stated once in an interview that whenever a record would come out, they would buy it and he would painstakingly sit at the piano and try to figure out exactly what these groups were doing, and so as to imitate them exactly. Even their style, even their way of dress, the way that they sang, this is what they wanted to do. South Africa is very interesting. It's like being African for a long time is sort of like, it's not a cool thing. When you sort of imitate styles from abroad, you almost are elevated. And I think that is the reason for a lot of their success, is because they were able to imitate these American groups so well. Of course, over time, they did get some criticism, because it was like they were going overseas and then they would sing what Americans were singing. And obviously you cannot do a style that is not your own and expect to do it better than the people who were born there. But the point here that I'm trying to make is that we can't really talk about South African jazz particularly without talking about the huge interest that we've always had with African American songs. And this brings me to this idea of Black solidarity, which this idea I got from another South African musician who I asked about this topic, and he told me that for him it's solidarity. It's seeing us in them. We are all Black people, and the music speaks to us. The music is home. There's something about the way that other black people play, particularly African Americans, something in the way in which they put their music together that sort of speaks to us. We're all black. There's nothing different. It's just a different part of the diaspora. And I think that's an important thing to add. Now, what makes South African music distinct from any other kind of jazz? And why, for a while, South African music has really been on the international platform and people have really been enjoying South African jazz, is because our music is really, really distinct. And when we think about why this is, I think it's because we have a style called Marabhi jazz, which is the 145 that I was talking about in the beginning. Marabhi jazz dates back to as early as the early 1950s. This was music that is based on a short song form, the 145 or 1415, and it's cyclical. This was music that was founded in the townships of South Africa, that would be like a ghetto in America. And it was played a lot in shebeens, which would obviously mean a lot of dancing and alcohol consumption. And so the music was sort of regarded in a lowly way. A Marabhi pianist, Edward Sililo, stated in an interview that Marabhi stemmed from indigenous music, Xhosa music, Zulu music, but as well as Sesotho music. So indigenous South African tribal music was embedded in the melody. These sort of indigenous melodies based off of pentatonic movements, maybe fourth intervals. African Christian hymns also had a lot of influence on Marabhi style. Like Edward Sililo said in the one interview that they would take a church hymn and then they would, quote, jazz it up. And this makes me think of a song by Ezra Ncukana called You Think You Know Me. I remember when I first heard that song, I was like, wait. I've heard this growing up in my church for the longest time, and now I'm actually hearing it on, like, with the band. It was like, yeah. So he literally took the melody of a church song and he put it in a jazz context with a saxophone lead. Also a song like Ola Kwedini. That's a tribal Xhosa song sung in many Xhosa ceremonies. Uzem Mwawana took the song and he put it in a jazz context. Ola Kwedini, Ola Kwedini kabawo. Kula kwetini kaba kauze nazo kwetini kaba wo. So there's this history of taking songs, shall we call it folk songs, because that's usually how it's categorized, folk or indigenous music that sort of gets jazzified or put in a context that is more modern, that is influenced also by our African American teachings. And if anything, the South African and American sort of obsession, because it's been called that, I like it because it means that we're connecting with our diaspora. We're not just limiting ourselves to our own tribes, but we are actually looking at ourselves as black people as a whole in the whole diaspora, which is a really good thing. And so Marabhi has been the backbone of South African jazz. Take, for instance, a very popular tune by Winston Mangungu called Yakhalinkomo. Yakhalinkomo emasimini ejokula amathole eqibitheka wathena umama Yakhalinkomo zabuya inkomo emasimini ejokula amathole eqibitheka wathena umama Yakhalinkomo zisanumcaba this song reminds me of American jazz song forms, where in the A section it would sort of be like a Latin style, and then in the B section it would be like a straight ahead swing. Except in the A section here we have a South African song style, which sort of lends itself to mbaqanga style. In the B section it's quite evident that it's jazz, not just because of the swing and the walking bass, but also the progression that 3-6-2-5-1 could not get any more jazz than that. And then that F sharp minor half step. No, it really borrows from jazz. If you haven't checked that song out, that song is by Babu Winston Mangungu. Do yourself a favor and listen to it. You'll really like it. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is a really worthy topic because conversations about diaspora are so important, that we not only think about our own selves and that we actually be collective as Black people, be a collective and have a oneness and realize that we are all the same. I hope you learned something from this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I really appreciate your video requests. I am still working on some requests that I got from some people. If you have not yet subscribed and you've made it till the end of the video, you might as well just subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye. Guys like Louis Armstrong were referred, like affectionately as the old man, Titopi, But like the lives and the suffering and the treatment of Africans in Africa, especially in industrial South Africa and in the States, was almost parallel and the same. And the only way out seemed to be like the prowess in music, It's one thing that nobody could play the trumpet better than Clifford Brown and Miles Davis, and not because they were like African Americans, as much as they must have worked so hard at it because it was their only outlet. They knew they could excel at that, but also the hunger to get out of the ghetto and all that was the same as our hunger to get out of the townships, I viewed myself leaving Johannesburg, going to New York, just the same way as Miles Davis left St. Louis to go to New York, Just I had to cross the ocean. But my attachment to New York jazz-wise, from the time I was 9, was the same as when Dizzy thought about New York when he was in South Carolina.